Welcome to Writing Black Joy Season 2. I am Sophia Robinson, and I'm a writing coach and an editor and a story listener, as well as the producer of Writing Black Joy, a virtual space that celebrates, centers, and promotes the voices of Black writers and storytellers with joyful and uplifting stories. Here, you'll find conversations with some of my favorite Black writers and storytellers, learn more about their projects and the joy they're bringing into the world, hear more about their creative process, and find inspiration for your own creative ventures, as well as tips and strategies for writing poetry, blogs, creative nonfiction, fiction, plays, and so much more from all types of writers, as well as a sneak peek into the writing life. You could even find your next favorite writer, book, poem, play, or blog. And if you are a Black writer who is looking for a coach or an editor to help you bring your joyful story into the world, then click on my website below to find out how to work with me. In the meantime, let's go to today's guest. Today's guest is Kathleen Naytia, and she is an editor, a podcaster, and a writer of speculative fiction, and she has joined me to talk all about editing. So, if you have any plans of getting your work out there as a writer, this conversation is a must listen. As my guest last week, Dawn Michelle Hardy, said, editing is non-negotiable in that process. And by the way, if you have not listened to last week's episode, you need to go and take a listen. It is gold for anyone who is writing or planning to write a book. Anyway, Kathleen and I go deep into talking about editing, what the editing process is and what it isn't, and how having the right editor can make your work better and improve your writing. We talk about how to choose an editor, the questions to ask, and how to advocate for yourself during the editing process. We even get a bit nerdy, talking about how language has evolved over time, and also what ableist language is or can be, and how an editor can help to ensure that your use of language keeps you true to your intentions for your story, as well as the nuance involved, particularly in writing fiction or memoir. And we talk about different types of editing and when to bring in that type of support. Now, as I mentioned, Kathleen's also a writer of speculative fiction. So we talk about her own writing practice and how a book by Octavia Butler changed her life, as well as her podcast, Loud in the Theater. This conversation is so full of wisdom and about the importance of editing in terms of writing and publishing your work. And I think it's a must listen for anyone who wants to write and bring that story into the world. I hope you enjoy our conversation as much as I did. Before we jump into this conversation, I just wanted to let you know how you can support us over here at Writing Black Joy. Firstly, you can join our Patreon community over at patreon.com/Sophia Robinson, and you'll find the link for that in the show notes. When you sign up over at Patreon to support us, you will get the opportunity to join our monthly group coaching calls and workshops that we'll be holding exclusively for Patreon supporters. So come on over and join the party. It's so much fun over there. Other ways you can support us: hit subscribe here on your podcast or over on the YouTube channel. You can also leave a podcast review, like our YouTube episodes, and share us with your friends. You can head over to our website and sign up for our mailing list, www.writingblackjoy.com. Also, follow Writing Black Joy over on Instagram at Writing Black Joy. All of these will be in the show notes. Thanks so much for listening and for supporting our show. Now, let's go to our guests. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Writing Black Joy Season 2. I should say welcome back. I'm Sophia, and I'm your host. I'm the podcast developer. Yes, we've got a podcast now. We've got a YouTube channel now. And today I am joined by the lovely Kathleen Naytia. And she is a speculative fiction writer, a freelance editor, podcast creator, and producer. All the things. I love it when they come like that. And her experience as a Black American woman living with a disability informs the way she both writes and edits. So welcome, Kathleen. I'm so glad you said yes. even though
I'm glad you invited me.
yes, Kathleen and I met very briefly I belong to a group of editors, and we met very briefly, and I was like, I want her on my show. So I just reached out to her and I was like, let's do it. And I'm so glad she said yes. So welcome, Kathleen. Thanks for
Thank you
joining
for
us.
having me.
No
Thank you for
problem.
having me. I love this show. I've been watching all the episodes and I'm just excited to be a part of
Uh,
this
and I'm
amazing creation.
perfect. And I'm so happy to have you here. Now, as I said earlier, I know you're an editor, but you've also got your podcast and you're also a writer. So we're going to be
Hmm.
digging into all the things. But we're going to start by talking a little bit about editing. Although I'm curious, tell me how you got involved. What type of editing do you do? Before we start, before we dig into that,
Hmm.
I want to say that I really wanted to have this conversation because obviously there are a lot of writers who watch this, and I want to bust out some myths about editing, right?
Hmm.
We're going to be talking deep about editing, and I feel like this is going to be perfect for anybody who is thinking about writing and publishing anything,
Yes.
right? So we're going to bust down some editing myths today. So tell us a bit about your work as an editor. Tell us what type of editing you do and all the things.
Well, I edit the gamut of things, everything from like novels, short stories to social media copy, web copy. I edit everything. If it has words, I edit it.
Mm.
So I'm pretty new to the freelance aspect of it, although I've been editing for years, like a long time. I just finally decided like to make people pay me for it.
Same here. Same here.
It's like, it's about time.
Mm.
I also do everything from like a simple proofreading to developmental edits, which are my favorites, are developmental edits for sure.
Mm. Yes, me too. And I like you, like I'm I remember like during the pandemic is when I started actually doing the freelance editing. And had done some edits for someone, and a friend of mine was like, how long have you been editing? And I'm like, 20 years. She was like, what? And I
Hmm.
was like, yeah, editing. I used to edit my friend's college
Hmm.
papers when I was at university.
Yes.
I'm aging myself now, but yeah, I've been doing it for years and years and years.
Listen, I was editing in high school and writing people's papers in high school. Like my senior year, there were people who were like, I don't want to write the senior paper. Can you do it for me? And I was writing people's senior paper for them.
Mhm. Craziness. So I know what you mean about having done it for so long, and then I've done a few courses and stuff like that, obviously. But like,
Hmm.
I it, I've been doing it for so long. I think I almost took it for granted that
Yeah,
it was something that you could actually charge people for. So it's been great to
definitely.
kind of you know get stuck into freelancing. Like I said, I've taken some courses and just try to provide more more stuff to my clients. Now, you said your favorite is developmental editing. So
Hmm.
we're going to dig into that. But before we do, I want to know why you think that joyful stories by Black writers and storytellers with Black characters, why is that important to you? You're as a writer, as an editor, as a reader, as a person who has a podcast about fiction. Like, why do you think that those joyful stories are important?
I love that question because I feel like we've been asking it a lot in just entertainment in general, where people are like, I'm sick of the slavery story. I'm sick of the white savior story. I'm sick of the Black struggle story.
Mm,
And I feel like it's important because it's hard to dream of yourself in a way or to envision a life that you've never seen. And so it's important for me to make sure that what I put out there is letting, I'm born and raised in the Bronx. And so I want any other little girl growing up in the Bronx who feels a little weird to be able to see themselves in a story that I write that's joyful and know or imagine that I can have that kind of life too. I can see myself as a mythical creature, or, I can imagine myself as a superhero. I can think about myself in a way that denotes, joy and freedom and just positive experiences. And growing up, I never saw anything like that.
mm,
Every image I saw of Blackness, or especially Black Americans, was negative. It was either we're the slave, we're the thug, we're the victim all the time.
Yeah.
And I know that as much pain as there was in my life, there was an immense amount of joy. And
Yes.
so I want to portray that in the work that I do, so that anyone coming up behind me knows what is possible for them, because I want everyone else to see or to envision themselves in places and in ways that we don't normally get to see in society. So yeah, that's why it's important for me to have joy as a part of the stories I tell.
I love that so much. And that I agree with that. You know, everybody, most people that watch us know I'm based in the Caribbean, and it's the same, right? It's the same.
Mhm.
You want to be able to provide a different story, a different narrative
Mhm.
around Blackness, and also for a young generation coming up, like have something to look forward to.
Yes.
So I absolutely love that. Is there a quote that you have brought to share with us today?
Yes. So let me make sure I got it right. Let me look at it real quick because I
Sure.
can say it right from the top. Yep, right from the top of my head. This is my favorite quote. I have lived by this quote for practically all my life, and I feel like I'm finally starting to really like put it into action. And it's focused. I'm a hustler, and my hustle is trying to figure out the best ways to do what I like without having to do much else. And that is
Hmm.
by Yassine Bey, also known as Most Def, the rapper slash actor, my
Yes.
favorite rapper in the world. And I love that quote because is that not what every artist is trying to do?
Mm.
Trying to figure out how to do the stuff that they like, create the things that they like without having to do anything else.
Having to do
And that's it.
anything.
Right.
I mm, I love that. And I think this is actually a perfect lead into talking about editing. My sister and I had a long conversation. I have two sisters, two wonderful sisters. Hey sisters, I know you're watching. I know you tell me you don't watch, but I know you're watching.
I
And
know you're looking.
I know you looking, I know you checking. And one of the things that one of the sisters I was talking to today and I were talking about is just in terms of writing, like so many writers tell me that they think they can write a book by themselves, right?
Mhm.
And they're afraid of the editing process because they feel like they're gonna get lost, like their voice is gonna get lost. They have this idea that the editor is gonna just come in and bulldoze in and remove them from their work. And
Mhm.
and I find this especially with so I can speak about Black writers, but I can also speak about Caribbean writers. Very recently, I was having a conversation with a local writer here,
Mhm.
and she did her master's in, I think it was in creative writing,
Mhm.
either in the UK or US, I can't remember. And she was saying she wanted to write a book that had in a Caribbean dialect, right? Each island tends to have their own dialect, their own
Yep.
patois type of thing. And kind of being told like you need to write in standard English, blah blah blah, right? um and so I get that. I think a lot of, I know it happens for Caribbean writers if they're abroad, or if their work is being, pardon me, their work is being read or published abroad, having this concern that what the essence of it is going to be removed by the editor.
Mhm.
And so they have a fear of the editing process, or they don't even think that an editor is necessary. They can do it themselves. They can get a friend to just read through it, and that type of thing. So I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into that. We get two editors together, so you might get a bit nerdy, but I'm okay with that. Kathleen is
Be
okay.
prepared for the nerds to jump
Get
out.
ready, get ready. But you, I know, like I said, how do you describe the editing process to clients or to people who might ask? What is it?
The first thing I would say is editing is a suggestion.
Mm,
You're paying us to suggest things to you. Nothing we say is written in stone. You do not have to take any of our advice. If you feel like an editor is giving you a suggestion that does not feel true to your characters, that does not feel true to your story or to you and your voice as a writer, you can absolutely disregard it and move on to the next suggestion. It's
okay.
your work. And I will say though that it's a valid fear because I've experienced working with people like that who felt like if you weren't writing like Shakespeare, then you were not valuable as a writer. And so I completely understand having that fear that someone is going to try to impose themselves onto your work. But like I said, it's all suggestions, and you don't have to take anyone's ideas or thoughts about your work seriously. You don't.
No. And I think that's so important. I had a really good, when I my first book, which I self-published, I had an amazing editor. And that was one of the first things that she told me. She was like, you don't have to change anything you don't want to change. Like, let's start there. Right. And how I tend to describe editing to my clients is like, editing is, as you said, it's a suggestion, which it's up to you whether you take it or leave it. But it's really a way of having an external lens to kind of catch the things that you did not catch, to help you. Like, I had a guest who, by the time this comes out, she would have been out last week, Dawn Michelle Hardy. She's a literary agent, and she said, I'm trying to remember how she put it. She was like, editing makes you a better writer, right?
Absolutely.
Because you already know the full story in your mind, and so you're reading and you're filling in the gaps, whether it's your spelling, whether it's the grammar that you're using. You spell something wrong, but in your mind you're seeing it correctly because you already know how to spell it. But it's also the stories. Like, you know the background of the story. You know all these things. Maybe the reader doesn't know these things, and so sometimes the editor will come along and be like, you can flesh this out more, right? I think people think an editor is going to take their work and rewrite it for them and be like,
right.
Okay, well, I've sent it off to the printers now, so too bad for you. When really, an editing is a collaborative process.
Yes.
Right? It's a very collaborative process between you, the writer, and the editor, with the editor making sure that the reader is reading your intention for the story.
Yes.
Which you may not have been clear about because you already know it in your head, and so you've been skipping pieces out and missing, or whatever the case may be. So that's what the editors are there for. They're there to collaborate with you as the writer, so they're not there to rewrite it for you or bulldoze over your opinions. It's like they're there to collaborate with you to ensure that what you present to the world was what you intended to present.
Exactly.
And so if it's your intention to present something that's written, there's a book that I love, Love After Love by Ingrid Prasad. She's a Trinidadian writer, and we read it for our book club months ago, last year, I think. I love her. I actually got to meet her in person then we read her first book for our book club, and we talked about it then, right? She writes a lot of Trinidadian phrases and accent, and I actually had the audiobook, so I felt like she was sitting in my kitchen reading it to me, which was so awesome. And that is it. That is the book that she wanted. That's the experience she wanted the reader to have. And to me, an editor is there to ensure that the reader has the experience that you want them to have.
A good editor.
Yes, a good editor. That's what they're there to do, collaborate with you to do that. So that's how I tend to describe it. And I love how you describe it as a suggestion, because it's really important to realize, like, you don't have to change anything you don't want to. It's your book.
Right. And trust me, there are times when we might be telling you the right thing and you're like, I'm not with it. And that's fine. It is your work at the end of the day.
Yeah. And there may also be times where I need you to explain it to me better so that I can do a better job of helping you bring that work into the world.
Another way I like to think of editing is, like, I know everyone's wearing their wireless headphones now and their earbuds and blah, blah, blah. But there was a time when we all had wired headphones connected to our device and then connected to our ears. And no matter how hard you tried to put that thing in your pocket neatly, by the time you pulled it out, it was a jumbled up mess. And to me, that's the writing process. No matter how neat and clear your story is in your head, by the time you get it to paper, it's all over the place. And you may be putting your best effort into making it organized. And the editing process is you taking the time to unravel, work out the knots, pull it apart, and make it make sense. And you want an editor who can sit with you and really pull it apart neatly, calm you down when you're losing control, to pull out the knots that maybe you're missing because you're a little too frazzled by the overall story, and really help you to get it to the point where you've got that full linear chord that you can finally listen to your music or your podcast or whatever with. That's the editing process. And you want someone who's going to work with you hand in hand in that process and not try to take it over or try to make it seem like you don't know what you're doing, and make you feel comfortable. That's the editing process.
And I totally agree with that completely. And I still have wired headphones, so not even gonna
I'm wearing a
lie.
pair now.
Yeah, it is what it is. This is new. Last season, I had wired headphones all the way, so I feel you completely. And I love that. I love that description of just untangling it and realizing that as a writer, sometimes you're too close to your own work to edit it. Not that you can't edit it, but that having that outside lens can help you gain that little bit of perspective. And I think that's how an editor makes you a better writer, because they kind of can tease out the nuances. They can kind of say, like, talk about this more, like, or they can say, like, if you'd have said this thing about this character in chapter 1, we would have been rooting for him in chapter 11, or whatever the case may be. So I think it's just remembering that sometimes you already know so much, you're so close to your work, and you need somebody who has that sort of different perspective to really kind of get into it. And so how would you say you think editing impacts the final product, whether it's a book? Because I know you edit different things, social media. I'm the same. I do blog posts. I do, I tend to more do nonfiction. I don't really edit fiction so much. Right now, I do a lot of nonfiction, books, blogs, that type of thing, social media. Not for any reason other than I feel like I only read certain types of fiction, and I know that this is going to be a whole other conversation, but books have a rhythm, they have a beat, right? And I feel like I don't always know the rhythm and the beats for, like, I wouldn't do science fiction because I don't read a lot of science fiction. I wouldn't do fantasy because I don't read a lot of fantasy. And so to me, I don't think I would do it justice to the writer without knowing the rhythm and the cadence and the beat that a book would have. So I don't, but I know you've got a lot of experience with those things. So I'm curious, how do you think, or how do you describe the impact that editing has on the finished product?
So I feel like the real storytelling happens in the editing process. And so I feel like the impact it has in the finished product is that the real story is going to be told after editing. You don't have the real story the first time you get it out on paper. You don't really have the full understanding of your characters or the arc they're going to have. You don't really know that story until you've edited at least 10, 15, 2,000 times. Once you have gone back and forth with that work, whether it's with someone else or on your own, that's when you're like, okay, now I know who these characters are. And I know for a fact that in chapter 3, when she said that one line of dialogue, that was absolutely not her. And I need to change that. And you cannot know that until you have the editing process, to me.
I totally agree with that. I even think, like, I always, one writer I do like, Neil Gaiman, and I remember him saying that, like, sometimes he's halfway through a book before he knows what the book is even about. Right? And so don't believe, that's why I tell people, like, don't write and edit yourself. There's some people who, like, they can't get past chapter 1 because they keep going over it and trying to get it perfect. And I'm like, you can't perfect chapter 1 until you've written chapter 12. So don't even try it. Don't even go back. Just write forward. And then that editing process will even assist you even greater in getting chapter 1 perfect. Now that you've gotten to chapter 12 and you actually understand what chapter 1 is really supposed to be.
Right. So once you get to know your characters, once you're at the end, and then you figure out what your ending is, and then you're like, yeah, all that stuff that happened in chapter 1, no, that's not really what's supposed to happen. Let me go back, now that I've finished, let me go back and make this the book it's really supposed to be.
And I absolutely love that so much. Choosing an editor. So we've already talked a bit about the editing process and how collaborative it is. And maybe, I know a lot of, and this is no insult to people who, how they advertise their work, but I always, I'm in a groups of writers, and sometimes people are like, I want an editor, and somebody's like, oh, just go find somebody on whatever website, I won't give the name away. and it's kind of like more of a focus on cost.
Right.
But I feel like there's so many other things to consider when you want to choose an editor. What are a few that you think would be really helpful for any of the writers watching?
One thing I want to say is, as a writer myself, it is 100% okay for you to vet an editor. Take your time, ask them questions, find out what types of books they like to read, what types of things have they edited in the past, what are their feelings on, dialects and in dialogue, and know those things before you give them your work, because you want to make sure that you have someone who's editing your work that not necessarily sees the world the way that you do, but respects the way that you see the world and understands that you're putting bits of yourself into your work. And so there are things that they just cannot fully critique or understand because it's something coming from you. So you want to make sure that you're taking the time to say, what do you read? I'm writing a literary fiction book about, two kids who save the world, but those kids are from the inner city, or they're from a specific type of culture. And are you okay with editing that work? Do you understand the nuances of that culture? And if you don't, will you take the time to have conversations with me about those nuances before making final decisions about what you think should be changed and what shouldn't? Those are the things that I would suggest greatly.
Yeah. And I love that so much. That brings us to something that, you may dive into a bit deeper later on. But I think that understanding, when I talked earlier about the fact that books have a beat, they have a cadence, they have a rhythm. There's a friend of mine who's in my book club, and she did this challenge where she was reading books from all over the world. And one of the things I remember her saying is, like, books from different cultures, they carry a different blueprint, for lack of a better word. Like, if you read a love story that's from a Western country, it's like girl meets boy, girls, like, if you watch a Hallmark movie, what I'm talking about, like girl meets boy, just had a breakup, blah, 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 whatever the case may be. That
she's
they have,
looking to make a change in her life.
To make a change in her life.
Path.
Exactly. And it's like, it's act 2. There's a misunderstanding. And the reality of it is, when people are reading those books, sometimes they are actually looking for those kind of like hallmarks, right? They're looking for those sort of that not beat. They know, it's like a superhero movie. That there's going to be a secondary character who's probably going to betray. They're going to start off good and then they're going to be bad. They're going to start off bad. Like, there are all these different really like markers that are sort of, they make it feel familiar, right?
Yes.
If you go and read a book from a different culture, sometimes part of the reason it feels so weird is because it doesn't follow that structure. It doesn't follow that sort of cadence. It doesn't have that rhythm. And so especially for somebody who's from a different culture, and you are writing a book that you want it to feel familiar based on the type of books that are coming out of your culture, you want an editor to understand that, and not to say, well, this has to be here and that has to be there, because they're coming at it with the lens of, from this particular culture.
Right.
And so I think that's really important for them. As you said, like, if you're not aware, are you willing to listen to me and understand that this is the structure that I want it to have? Because there's no right way to write a book, right? And understanding that. And so I think that's really good. For me, one of the things that I think is important when you're choosing an editor, one of the important questions to ask yourself and to understand about yourself is, how do you like to receive feedback? What sort of how do you like to receive it? How do you like to sort of, what that level of communication, and make sure that you and the editor are on the same page? Because I think, and this is something I was doing a bit of reading, watching some stuff on, like, they call it trauma-informed editing, but basically they're talking about, if somebody's writing something really personal to them, you're writing a memoir, or you're writing your personal story, or the book, a lot of us writers, we wanted to write this book since we were a child. Okay, it's like our, as one of my guests, he's not. Yeah, I recorded him already, but he'll be after this when he says, like, it's your baby, you don't want anybody to tell you that your baby's ugly. Like, that's basically what it is, right? It's like, this is your something that's so personal to you, and you want the person to be able to respect that and kind of communicate with you in a way that kind of is you can work with them, right? And so to me, it's learning how to say that if you know, kind of set up your own boundaries beforehand and see, can I actually communicate with this person? Are they the kind of person that I can talk to? That if I feel uncomfortable with something, I can tell them. Like, I feel like, and that's part of the reason why, like, I try to talk to my clients before they hire me, even though I know everybody's like, I don't have time for that. Well, yeah, because especially if it's something personal, like I want them to feel like, can you talk to me? Can you say to me, well, what about this? What about that? And I don't like the suggestion that you made. And you know, how comfortable do you feel advocating for yourself? Because you're going to have to do that, or you may have to do that during the process, and you want to make sure it's somebody that you can do that with.
Yes, yes. I think that's amazing. And I'm going to be honest, I never think to mention that because I try to move within the editing experience, because as a writer, I am not sensitive at all. I want you to tell me my baby is ugly so that I don't go around showing everybody my baby. Tell me my baby is ugly. Please.
Oh my life.
I embarrass myself showing my baby off on Instagram, and
you're
meanwhile
like,
everyone's
no,
like,
no,
ugh.
you need a hat on that chick.
Okay. Put a veil over that face, something.
You want the truth.
Exactly. And my feelings will not get hurt. They never get hurt. But I have had the experience where I wrote a short story about my experience with my father, who was an immigrant from Jamaica. And I wrote about my experience with him as my father. And he's passed away now, God rest his soul. But I wrote about that experience and how our relationship kind of developed after his death, as well as what it was before his death. And I handed it to someone to edit, who has had a very traumatic experience with their own father. And she could not objectively edit that work because in her mind, there was no redeeming my father for any of his flaws or his mistakes, because she could not redeem her own father. And she just could not see my work the way that I had written it from my experience. She could only see it through her own experience, which is fair. And I feel like that may have been my mistake in giving her that work, because I knew that about her past. And so I should have known better than to give her that work. And she wasn't an editor. She was a writer friend that I just said, hey, take a look. And listen, this is why you need a real editor.
Why you need a real editor, objective person.
Yes.
And also somebody who would say, I can't edit this.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Somebody who's professional enough to say, yeah, no, I'm not editing this. And there's some things that I will not edit.
Same. Absolutely. There's some things I'm just not, I know that I can't handle it. It's not for me. My emotional state will be impacted greatly. And so I'll let you pass that on to someone else who can do a better job.
Who will do it justice, who will really do a service to your story.
Yes.
So that's such a good example to give. What are your thoughts? This is a bit random, but this is based on a conversation that I was having with some other editors, the same group that we were part of before you joined it. We were talking a bit about how language has changed over time. And this is something, I don't know how much you know about Enid Blyton, because I know that's more of a British thing, but I grew up reading Enid Blyton books, right? I grew up as a child reading Enid Blyton books, loved them then, still love them now. But it's very clear that they were written in the 1940s by a very privileged white person in a time when this was the dynamic, right? And so a lot of the things that she has written about and talks about, and the way she talks about them, the language that she uses, would probably not be appropriate now at all.
Right?
Like, that's just the way it is. And language is changing all the time, right? I think our sort of the nuance, our understanding of it is changing all the time. How do you communicate to writers, if they've written something that you think to yourself, well, that would probably be offensive right now, if you see what I mean? I don't know how else to say it, but how do you tend to handle that? I'm just curious.
I come right out and say it. I mean, I'm gentle about it. There's I don't know if you know the Hillary Duff song "With Love." where in the song she's just like, say what you need to say to me, judge me and criticize me, but say it with love, because remember that you love me. And
Mm.
so I will do it with love if I know you and I know that your intention is not to be disrespectful or insensitive or racist or sexist or any type of phobic or ism. If I know you and I know that you don't intend that, I have no problem saying, hey, so this wording right here, it can imply this thing. And
Mhm.
I don't know if that's your intention. Maybe look into changing that or do a little bit more research behind what that really means, that phrase really means. And I've done that before. And the person was like, oh my God, thank you. I didn't even realize. I did the research and I saw what it means and I completely took it out of everything that I write. I will never use it again. But you will have someone who's like, well, I don't see what the big deal is.
Mhm.
And if that's the way you feel, I'm not the editor for you.
That's what I was gonna say, and I know something. I would have read it in the bio, and something would have been mentioned off the air. But I know you in your bio you said that your sort of experience, both as a Black woman as somebody with a disability, it kind of it shows itself up in your editing. So then,
Mm-hmm.
how do you find? Because I know something that I'm more aware of now is even very ableist language and things that are concepts, ideas that are very ableist. And I think that's even, it's not a new concept, but I think it's something that a lot of people may not be familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I'd love to hear your take on that a little bit, as that's your experience and you're sort of more familiar with that.
Yes. So I have lived my entire life with depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, ADHD, sickle cell trait the great gift that my father gave me, sickle cell traits. And so I understand what it's like to read something and especially when I see someone who's like, oh, I'm she's so neat, she's so OCD. And I'm like, yeah, that's not okay. That's ableist language.
Yeah.
And I have no problem saying that is ableist language, because being OCD is not just wanting your room to be clean. That's not what
Yes.
OCD is. Or someone who's just like, oh, I can't focus today. It's my ADD. And it's, first of all, ADD is not a phrase that is used anymore. It's ADHD. That is the blanket term, and it is a spectrum. And you just not being able to focus today because you're having a bad day is not that. And I feel like being able to not just, you don't have to have the experience of it to speak on it. If you see it and if it makes you feel uncomfortable at all, or you do a bit of research to say, is that really, I don't feel like that's the phrasing that's used anymore. Let me look it up. Let me Google it. Let me read a little bit and get back to this writer and say, so I did some research and I don't think that's the way people are describing this issue anymore. I don't think this language that you're using around it is appropriate anymore. You might want to look into changing that. But then we also have to realize that there are times when, if certain language is being used by a character, it may be because that character is the sort of person that would use that language.
That language, yes.
And so you have to recognize that, and you have to understand that it is not, I've had to deal with people who were trying to correct characters. And I'm like, the writer knows that that is not okay. The point is this is a character that's an asshole and we're not supposed to like them.
Yes.
We're supposed to hate them for saying these things. And so
Yeah.
there's a nuance to it for sure.
Definitely. And I always remember, there are times when, and I remember there's a book that I've been reading recently. The writer is a Black writer, and he had a white ghostwriter. And he was talking about an experience that he had growing up, a lot of the names that he was being called, N-word, this, that, whatever. And the ghostwriter was like, can I use this language? And I'm like, but he's relaying a personal experience.
Yes.
Right. I might edit that differently to how I might edit, somebody who's just using it for the sake of, I don't know how else to describe it, but like, you have to be respectful of the fact that this was his personal experience. He's writing a personal story. He's relaying an actual experience that he had versus saying, well, we can't use this language anymore now because blah, 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 whatever. So to me, it is just being able to understand that nuance. But I think that's why you need an editor that you can really advocate for yourself with. And you have to be prepared to advocate for yourself as a writer, regardless, because there are going to be times when you need to stand up for what you've written, for your story, for your character, for whatever the case may be. And so to me, I think that's really important as well. I'm curious, what type of obstacles have you seen your clients face, or maybe fellow writers face, as they have tried to go through the editing process or even the publishing process?
The publishing process is hard to say because unfortunately, I'm not, publishing in the sense of like short stories and publications, but I'm not yet amongst the elite who have published novels and like all of that stuff.
It's not even that exciting. It's not even that, but yeah.
So I can say that for me personally, an issue that I've had with having my work edited was people not imposing their expectations of my culture or my upbringing on my writing. Because yes, I was born and raised in the Bronx, New York, and anyone who knows the Bronx, New York knows it's the hood. Okay.
Okay.
And but there are some beautiful parts of the Bronx, and I grew up walking distance from a beach, and people are just like, oh, this isn't the real Bronx, right? This is some type of like neo. And I'm like, no, this in this story is the Bronx. I don't know what you think the Bronx, and it's people who've never been there who just have this preconceived notion of what it is to be from the Bronx, and who hear me speak or see what I'm writing and like, this is not what I would expect from a person from the Bronx. And it's like, who do you think lives in the Bronx? A bunch of 8 people? I don't know what you think is happening.
No, but I think, like, to me, that gets to the heart of even, why I kind of did this series, but like why I think I called them, I always talk about everyday storytellers, and I talk about the fact that you want people to tell their stories, and telling their story. You don't have to write a book to tell your story. You don't have to have a short story published in a journal to tell your story. You don't have to have a blog to tell your story, or be in a theater, or whatever the case may be, have a podcast, whatever the case is. To me, that's why I call them everyday storytellers. I'm like, these stories need to be out there, because the reality of it is, I think that real stories can smash a lot of stigmas and stereotypes.
Yes.
Right. And that is what is so critical about having these different stories out there. Again, talking to my sister this morning, I was saying, a lot of what is out there, it's out there because that's what was always out there. So before, there was a lot of self-publishing, and a lot of the internet allowed people to have their blogs and Wattpad and Medium and Vocal and all the different platforms that you can kind of share your writing on. And you can share your writing in so many ways. You don't have to have a blog. Go and get a Medium account. Go and sign up for Vocal, or whatever the case is. But that's a separate point. Before there were all of these things, and there were so many more gatekeepers, it's kind of like people always published what they always publish. And so you just get these reinforcement of these stereotypes and these stigmas of like, people from the Caribbean, they're like this, people from the Bronx, they're like that, people from wherever. And one of the examples that she and I were talking about, one of my future guest, so you're going to be hearing from him in a couple of weeks' time, Philip Robinson, also, yes, relation, and also a family friend. His sister's in a book club with me, but we are apparently related as well.
Oh, nice.
He wrote a book called Nia and the Kingdom of Celebration. That was his first children's book, and he wrote it for his daughter because he wanted to write a daughter about a royal family that was like dark skinned, black, so that she could see herself reflected in this book. He lives in the UK. His family, they're all in the UK now, but he grew up in Barbados with us. And he said that when he was working with this illustrator, and when she first returned the pictures back to him, he was like, they don't look royal, right? And I don't want to spoil the story for people who are listening, but you got to listen to that episode. It's so good.
Yeah.
But, my sister and I were talking this morning about if you asked a Black child from the Caribbean to draw a princess, they're probably going to draw this blonde-haired, blue-eyed, because that's their idea of what it is. And I'm like, right, but that's why you need these stories out there to smash those stereotypes, to show different ideas, to kind of, okay, yeah, you can have an Indian princess, or you can have a Black princess, or you can have a mixed race princess, whatever the case may be, right? And have those stories out there. So I think, like, you know, your sort of stories about the Bronx and the beautiful parts of it, like, that's why you need to tell those stories, so that people can, who haven't been to the Bronx, or who might not go to the Bronx because they feel like, oh, I don't want to go down there because it's going to be all crazy. Like, oh, is there a nice side to it? I didn't realize. Yeah, let me go and visit. I always say, when the very first time I visited New York, and this was not the Bronx, this is just New York. I grew up in Barbados. I was living in England at the time. My best friend was studying in New Jersey, but she was living in an apartment in New York. And so I'm visiting for the first time, and all I remember is hearing all these people talking about, you go on the subway, you're gonna get shot, all this.
Oh my
right?
God.
Just like, okay, sure. So I get the plane over, I get this thing, and she's like, you're gonna get the shuttle from, let me see if I can get this right. You're gonna get the shuttle from Times Square to Grand Central, right? That's right.
They're kind of the same, just different ends of the same.
Right. So there's a shuttle that will take you from one to the next, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't understand that was all the shuttle did, right?
Yes.
So I get
it takes you from one end of 40 seconds to the other end.
Exactly.
That's literally all it does.
Literally. Get into the subway now, and it maybe it's at Times Square, it stops at Grand Central, and I'm like, do I get out here? Like, what's happening? I didn't want to ask any questions, because I'm like, I'm sure if I ask, like, you know, that somebody's going to think, oh, she's a tourist, and then I'm going to, you know, someone's going to kidnap me watching too much Law and Order or whatever, right? Listen, I went back and forth between Times Square and Grand Central about 6 times before I got off the subway. And I kept getting out of one door and going into the next, because I didn't want to ask. I was so afraid. My friend was like, you are so dumb. Like, what is wrong with you? But honestly, because I didn't want to ask any questions, and I always heard these things about, like, you get on the New York subway, like, someone's gonna, you know, like, you're not gonna make it out alive type of
There
thing.
is nothing a New Yorker loves more than being asked directions. They love putting on display how well they know the city.
Yeah. And, you know, like, that's not what they don't tell you that on the news. So I love it that there, you know, that we have so many resources now for telling these stories, and, like, people getting to know your hometown in a way that they wouldn't otherwise do it if all that was out there were, like, stereotypes and stigmas. So I think that's just a perfect example, and we just went on a complete tangent, but we're gonna bring it right back to my sort of semi-last question about editing before we dive into a little bit talking about your writing. What advice would you give a writer?
A writer who's looking for an editor, or just in general? Like,
in general, a writer who may be looking for an editor, who may be afraid of the editing process, who may be like, yeah, I don't want an editor, I don't need an editor, that's too much money, or whatever the case may be. What advice would you give a writer who's curious about the editing process?
I would say, number one, I know that as a writer, we put ourselves completely into our stories. We pour ourselves into it, but there is a point where you have to let the story go and put it into the world and put it into someone's hands, and understand that someone's critique or edits of your work is not personal. It is not about you as a person, and it is not about your skills as a writer. And the goal is always to make it the best it can be. Don't take it to heart. And I know it's easier said than done, but I'm telling you, that has been the best thing that has happened to me as a writer, is to know that, oh, you don't like that story? All right.
That's all right. Yeah. That's cool. It's okay. It's fine.
Moving on. There are billions, literally billions of people on this earth. At least one of them is going to like your work.
Yes. And at the end of the day, you don't like everything you read.
Exactly.
Everybody's not going to like your story.
Exactly.
That doesn't.
And so you can't expect everyone to like what you write if you don't like everything that you experience.
No, never. Absolutely not. This is just the way it is. You're not going to like everything. everybody's not going to like everything. It's just how it is. One thing that we didn't do, but we can kind of like do quickly, because as I said right at the beginning, you said you really loved developmental editing, and I feel like I can start and then you can jump in if you want, but like I just wanted writers to know that there are different types of editing. All right. So I always describe developmental editing, like to me, that's a real co-creative process of like, you may have a bunch of content, maybe you've got blog posts, maybe you've got like bits of a story from here or there, you've got ideas, you've got things in your journal that you've been writing down, like you've got a fair amount of content, and the developmental editor works with you to kind of bring the story together, bring the draft together. What would you add to that?
If you're having like bits and pieces here or there, I think that's when you really need to get a second person involved. That's when you really need to get an editor involved, because when you have all of these pieces and you're not seeing the way to connect it all, you are looking at it too much, and you may need to zoom out and let someone else deal with it. I mean, if I can inject my own experience into here, because I've been doing that the entire time.
That's why you're here. That is why you're here, and I'm not here on my own, so go for it.
So I recently completed my MFA, I think December 2020, I graduated. And the last semester of that, I had to edit over 75,000 word, 150 page thesis. And there's a point where you get to where you just cannot look at your own work anymore. My thesis mentor at one point asked, so do you want to run through one more edit? How do you feel about it? I was just like, I cannot read these words anymore. I cannot do it. I need to move on to a different part of this process already. And after I submitted it and I came back to it 6 months later, I was reading it like, I wish I had changed this. I wish this word had been this word. I wish the dialogue was a little bit more like this. But that was because I pulled away from it, and other people had a chance to look at it and tell me what they thought and give me some ideas for improvements. And that's the process you need to have. So when you have a piece here and a piece there, and you're not really sure how to connect it, and you might think that this way, and the character's looking this way in this section, and then they change to this in this section, you're not sure how you got from A to B, you need someone else's opinion to get in there and show you, well, this is how you got from A to B. This is what you're missing.
And to tease it out of you, to pull it out of you. Sometimes you need somebody to ask you those questions, to kind of like in a different way to how you're asking them to yourself, to kind of tease those details out and ask questions that, ooh, good question, I never thought about that, but that's actually perfect. Like you need that person to kind of pull it out of you sometimes. And to me, that's what developmental editing is.
Yes. And I love that moment when someone's like, did you think about this with that character? And I'm like, oh, duh.
That's perfect. I love it.
That's exactly what I needed.
Thank you. Right. So that's developmental editing. And so that's something that you would do before you're even finished the piece, right?
Oh yeah.
So then you have, and I realize different people, different sphere, they call it different things. They may call it copy editing, there's line editing, that type of thing. And I feel like, so that is, to me now, that's with a finished draft, right? So you finished your draft, you've kind of gone through a few edits yourself, and now you're giving it to someone else to kind of do the first broad edit. And to me, copy editing, structural editing, whatever you want to call it, it's like the person looking at the book and ensuring you have coherence, cohesiveness, continuity from one chapter to the next, from the beginning to the end. The example that I always give you writing nonfiction, it's like you might decide, I'm going to write this book for moms. I'm going to write a book for moms, and I'm writing all this stuff for mom. And then by the end of it, you're talking about pregnancy. And it's like, did you mean to do that? Did you mean to be switching kind of like who the focus was on? Maybe you want to switch these around so that you start talking about pregnancy and then you end up talking about moms. Maybe you don't want to include this piece. Maybe you just want to keep the mom bit here and take the pregnancy, like how make sure that the book is cohesive and coherent and the content, you don't switch context from beginning to end, that type of thing.
Yes.
Right. So that to me is more like that structural piece. So you've got a finished draft now. And the person is just helping you to ensure that the reader has this great experience of reading from start to finish, and it kind of is what you want it to be.
Right.
I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect way to describe it. It's definitely making sure, if you started out writing in past tense in the beginning, you didn't suddenly become present tense in the middle and then go back to being past tense. And you want someone else to look at that and see that. And that's definitely what, line editing and copy editing can do, is they really take their time and they're going through each and everything that you say and making sure that what you're saying makes sense and connects to what you intend to say.
And it is what you intend to say. And I always say, like, I've been blogging for a few years now, and I started audio recording my blogs, and even reading them out loud, I was catching my own mistakes, right? And so I'm like, that's, to me, like, an editor can do that on a larger scale, because it's hard for you to catch your own mistakes. And so they're looking at that's, it's called line editing, because they go line by line. Like, did this sentence make sense? Like, the paragraph might have made sense, but this sentence, this doesn't actually make sense. Like, it doesn't actually fit here. It doesn't make any sense. Is that what you meant to say? Was this a typo? Did you miss out a word? Like, this doesn't actually make sense. And when you read it, because you know what it's supposed to say, you just glossed right over it. You don't even know that it's there. So that's what the line editing, to me, process is about.
Yeah. And not just that, it's just like, in this conversation, how many times have we gone off on a tangent? You do that in your writing. And you want someone to catch those tangents and say, hey, you got a little personal right here.
Yeah,
I think that was supposed to happen right there.
Bring it back.
Take that out.
I know, right? or vice versa. One of my guests from season 1, Maria Colmore, she talked about when she had written a book for entrepreneurs, and the editor was like, maybe use some personal stories, personal examples here. And she was like, nobody wants to hear my personal story. I'm like, yeah, they do.
No, we need it there.
Yeah. So even to kind of make those types of suggestions, to bring in, that type of thing, and how can you bring it in to give an example without kind of going off point.
Yeah.
Right. So to me, that's what the line editing, the copy editing, because there's lots of different ways to describe it, but that's what that process is. And then, finally, we talk about proofreading, which is, I think, the thing that everybody thinks about, the typos and the grammar and the, that type of thing. And that's a different thing. Again, that is, proofreaders aren't supposed to make structural corrections. They're not supposed to say, put this here and put that there. They're really there to just, they really should be dealing with a finished. In fact, I remember learning a while ago that it should actually, it came from the newspaper, like the media newsprint era, where the person was proofing the layout. And so they're like, your book should actually, if it's a book, it should actually be laid out when you're proofreading it, so that you can make sure that, you don't end up with sentences like half a word, like, like that type of thing. So even little things like that, the proofreader can catch. And so that's why sometimes you will write a book, the person will proofread the thing on the computer, then you'll go and have it laid out in the book, and then you'll get the book draft back, and you're like,
it's a totally different experience. It's like a totally different book.
Yes. And so, it's important to have proofreading done at the right time. Don't expect when you come to work with your developmental editor, they're not checking spelling, typos.
That's right.
It's not going to happen, right? When you have your copy editor, they might not, and they send something back for you to make changes to, they're not necessarily going to be correcting typos. That's not what happens then. That has to be the last thing that happens, because if you're making changes, then you want the typos corrected after you've made the changes, after you've got it laid out, after you have it however you want it. So yeah, that's what I would say. Have you got anything you'd like to say about copy? Because I know you do some proofreading as well.
Oh yeah, with proofreading, it is definitely something that should happen when you're already at the point where I'm ready to start submitting this. I'm ready to start, and I just want to really get this as clean as possible, because the developmental part of it, I don't care how you spell your words. I want to make sure you are telling the story. That's what the developmental part is. And then the copy and the line editing is making sure that it's coherent. And like you said, it's cohesive and it's neat. And then you get to the proofreading, it's like, We want to prove to people that you can read, that you know how words should be spelled and where punctuation goes. And that is it. And if I'm completely honest, I hate proofreading.
I don't do
I
it.
hate it.
I won't. And that's something that I will, I will highlight that out.
Yeah. I absolutely hate it because I'm like, as a writer, I don't care. I do not care if my punctuation is okay. I do not. Did my character make sense to you? Did they come off the page the way I want them to? Great. I didn't spell that word right. I don't care.
It is what it is, yeah. And so that is a thing. But yeah, thanks for that. I just thought it would be great. Maybe we should, if we had a proper editor listening to this episode now, they would have said, you should have said that at the beginning, but it's too late now. I'm editing this, and I promise you, I'm not moving it to the beginning. So if you've made it this far in the conversation, congratulations. Now you know the different types of editing. But we probably
listen, it's in there. It's in there. Beginning, middle, end. It's in there.
It's in here. So let's switch topics slightly. I'd love to know a bit about your writing. So I know you write speculative fiction. Mm-hmm. So maybe there's some of us out there who don't know what that is. So can you give us some examples or talk a little bit about what type of thing you write?
Absolutely. I love talking about speculative everything.
Yes.
So speculative fiction is generally horror, sci-fi, fantasy, and all of the subgenres in between, and all of the ways you can mix those genres up together. And I absolutely love everything speculative.
How did you get into writing it? Was it something that you always used to read? Or, I guess maybe you still read it now. How did you get into that?
Yeah, I always read speculative fiction growing up. My favorite writer as a kid was R.L. Stine. I loved Goosebumps. You give me Goosebumps and you have made my day. One of my favorite books as a kid was called Home for the Howlidays. Howl as in a wolf howling. And I just have always loved it. I love horror movies, and fantasy and sci-fi is like my favorite subject all around. But writing it, I never used to do. I always felt like, and this is probably going to sound ridiculous, but I thought that as a Black woman writing, I was only allowed to write like Toni Morrison or Zora Neale Hurston. And I didn't think that I had permission or the right to write characters that were anything other than a struggling Black woman. And it wasn't until in undergrad when I took a class where we would read a book and watch a movie and compare the themes and the way the stories were told in the two. And that professor gave me the Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. And that book blew my mind. It was like, oh, wait, I can write a book about like a Black girl who starts her own society and religion in a post-apocalyptic world. I can do that. I can write books about vampires that are Black girls. Okay, wait a minute. What is this
Hold
world?
up. What is this?
Wait a damn minute here. What's going on? And that completely, from that point on, I have not written anything other than speculative because it completely changed my life. I wish someone in middle school had handed me an Octavia Butler book, because I don't even know who I'd be at this point if I had had that information just a little bit sooner. Just a little bit.
Yeah, I love that so much. And I think I love that permission giving. Yeah. Like we forget how, doing something different gives other people that permission.
Yes.
To do it as well. And I'm so happy that you had a professor that was able to introduce you to that. We have there's a lady, Barbadian lady, Karen Lord, and she writes sci-fi as well. She used to teach my sister at school. It's so random. And I met her again. She came to our book club. And it's been so nice. It was so nice meeting her, as you said, and feeling like, I can write sci-fi. It's not just for old white guys or whatever.
Exactly.
You can write whatever you want. I might need to hire you as my developmental editor, because I started writing this superhero book last year, and it's kicking my butt right now. Okay.
Yes.
So we're gonna have to talk about that off air, but let me tell you, it's hurting. It's hurting. But I just wanted to. I'm like, oh, what if I wrote about superheroes who are women in their 40s, right? I'm not even gonna give it away, but it's the ideas just appeal to me so much. I can't.
Please, please,
Yeah.
please, even if you don't want me to edit it, just please let me read it. I
Yeah.
want this story to exist. Please
So
finish
hard.
it.
Yeah, I'll tell you all about it when we get off the air, but I want to finish it so bad, but I'm in my own head because I think a part of the problem is, you know, when you grow up reading something, like you talked about growing up reading Goosebumps and like reading that type of thing. And I think sometimes you kind of you get in your own head, like you kind of too perfectionistic about it, right? Like, you know, I always wanted to write this epic fantasy.
Yeah.
And it couldn't just be a fantasy, right? It had to be epic.
Yes.
You understand what I'm saying?
It has to be like world changing.
You know, like it has to have it. I always used to describe it as it has to have its own book to describe what's going on. Like you can't just read my book. You need to read the
you need to read
book.
The outline. You need to read.
You need to read this the word isn't even coming to me right now, so I feel really
the index of all the words. Yes. Here's a special map.
Here's a special map of the world that I develop. All these things, and you know, and I can sit down and knock out like a romance novel in no time because I don't really care. Like, when it comes to writing the thing that I always wanted to write, like I get in my head about it, and yeah, so I'm just confessions of writer here. Like it's not always just because you write one book doesn't mean that you can write every book that you start. But
and not everyone's out here being Stephen King and writing a book every month. We're all here struggling to get these books out of us.
I know, right? And keep on going. This is my permission slip to anybody out there. Like, just keep writing. It'll happen. It'll definitely happen. So what's been your proudest moment, either as an editor, as a writer, as a whatever, like what's been as a podcaster? We didn't even talk about we're going to have to I think I'm going to have you back. And I've said this to every single guest I've had, like, I think I'm going to have you back. We haven't even talked about that. But before we talk about that, tell me what was been your proudest moment as a writer or an editor?
This is hard to answer because for me, every moment is equally like a big deal. It's like, oh my God, I wrote for an hour today is as big a deal to me as, oh, I got that short story published somewhere. Like they're equally great to me because I understand how hard it is just to write, just to get the words on the page. It's hard. And so it's hard for me to say like what my proudest moment is. I think for me, the proudest moments are when I just do the thing and I stop thinking so much about it and mulling over it and being worried about it. And so creating my podcast when I spent years thinking about the podcast, finally just like having a single episode up was like, oh my God, it's not in here in my head anymore. It's real and it exists in the world. And so those are the proudest moments when I actually do the thing.
I'm so happy. You don't even know how happy it made me that you said that, because it is the truth. It is so the truth. Like, you know, the minute that you do that thing, you should be proud of yourself. And I think sometimes we gloss over those moments because, you know, because I wanted my first book to be this epic fiction and it wasn't. It was this little nonfiction book about, you know, my own personal development journey. I kind of glossed over that because it wasn't the thing. But you know, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. Even when you just write for an hour.
Some people don't even get to the point of having a finished product that they can be disappointed in because they never finish. They never have the product. And so even if you don't love what you created it when so many people don't even get to that point. And so just that it's out there. It's like, I can't believe I did that.
I love it. And tell us about your podcast, because I'm going to be binge listening to this as soon as I get off this call, right? So tell us about your podcast.
So it's called Loud in the Theater, and it's my brother and I talking about all things speculative in TV and movies, and sometimes we drop in bits and pieces of video games and podcasts because we're big, giant nerds. And so we talk all about that stuff.
I love it. I love that it's so exciting to be a nerd now. When I
Oh
was growing
yes,
up,
it
it
is
was terrible
great.
being a nerd. Now I'm like, being a nerd is
We are
the
having our
best.
moments in the
Oh, we
world.
are. We're having our glow up. We need to just
Yes.
go with it.
I'm gonna luxuriate in it for as long
Mm,
as I can before
me
people are like,
too.
ew, nerds. I'm gonna love on it.
I'm just loving it, loving up in it until, as you said, the next
Yes.
thing comes along.
Yes. So yeah, we just talk about, and we're very like casual. And listen, if you don't like cursing, it is potty mouth central. We are saying the N-word, we're saying F you to each other, we curse each other out. I curse my brother out all the time because he's always screwing something up.
Your brother. What else are you gonna do with your brother? I mean, I don't have any brothers, but I can
Listen, if
imagine.
you cannot curse your sibling out, who can you curse out?
What are you even
What's the
doing
point
in
of
life?
siblings? Right. The whole reason they exist is so that you can do to them what you can't do to anyone else.
Okay, Nyla and Tuliba, ignore what she just said, okay? We love each other, all right? Go ahead.
Me too, but listen. I love my siblings, but listen, I'm going to get the curse outs out of me through them. Yeah, we have a good time and we tell jokes and make fun of the stuff that we watch, and we're very, very brutally honest in our critiques. And we have our moments where we get to what I like to call intellectually ratchet or ratchet intellectualism, where we are really speaking deeply about important things happening in the world and how this piece of art is impacting that or reflecting that, and talk about what it really means to us as individuals and people a part of this society. And then we go right back to be like, but F that, this is dumb.
All right, I'm gonna go search for this podcast as soon as we're finished, and I'm gonna actually drop the links in the show notes because
have
I
to share
feel
it with
like
you. Yes,
people,
yes.
yeah, please do. I
Yeah, we're
cannot.
on hiatus right now, but we'll be back February of this year. I think this episode's coming out before February. So
This episode is coming out on the 24th of January.
okay.
So
Yeah.
yeah, and then February is from February. I'll have my other guests as well. So yeah.
Okay. So yeah, about February 3rd, is it? Should be our first episode of the year. Where we're coming back from a very long hiatus that I needed. Podcasting is hard, guys.
Podcasting is hardcore. Okay, don't even. I tell you, I was saying, somebody was like, "You're gonna have a guest every week." I'm like, "No, I'm gonna have seasons because that is all I can handle."
Yes.
Season 2. When season 2 is done, I need a minute, and then we'll have season 3.
I highly recommend seasons, especially if you're doing all the work by yourself. I highly recommend seasons where you can take time to reevaluate, think about, plan, and get back to it and take a break and breathe.
A minute to breathe. Yes. And also step away from it. Like, what you were saying about your thesis the other day. Like, I think sometimes we actually need to step away from the things that we create.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And I think about that even with season 1. I did it. I completed it. It was 11 episodes or whatever the case was. And I stepped away from it. And in stepping away from it, I understood, okay, this was what I wanted it to be. This was what it actually was. Actually, I like some of these things. I don't like some of these things. What am I going to do next season? How am I going to, like, sometimes you need to step away from the things that you create to get that perspective.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I definitely agree with that. And also I'm looking forward to your next season, and I'm going to drop all the links down in the show notes. And so, of course, we've been talking a little bit about what you love to read. It sounds like you love to read a bit of anything speculative. What's something you read recently that you you'd love to talk about or kind of just recommend to our listeners?
Reading has been difficult lately. Like, I don't know if it's the pandemic, or once I finished grad school, I was like, ew, books, no thank you.
She says with a bookshelf behind her that is like about to topple over on her head.
It really is.
Oh, okay, just FYI, all right? I can see it. We can all see it, Kathleen. Don't even.
This is true. I mean, reading books has nothing to do with buying books. They're two very different activities. Yes.
Completely. Yes. It's like buying craft stuff is not the same as making craft. They're two different
if you could see the mountain of craft stuff next to me, like out of the camera shot.
Crochet thread over there. Okay. Cloth. You just can't
listen.
because of the direction. Trust me, I live in that life too. I'm
It's
living that
really
life.
ridiculous. But I was like, this year I have to get back to reading. I miss reading, and reading really helps me as a writer because it inspires me. And so it's part of my like creative practice. It's like I always read right before I write. And right now I'm reading my favorite book of all time, which is The Particular Sadness of Lemon Cake by Amy Bender.
I'm
It's a
sorry.
magic.
The Particular Sadness of Lemon Cake.
Yes.
All right. I actually make the world's best lemon cake. And so this is really interesting to me. Go, I'm listening.
So it is about this little girl who on around her 9th birthday discovers that she can taste the emotions of the people who are cooking in the food they cook. And it starts when she tastes her mother's depression in the lemon cake she made for her birthday. And it's a magical realism book. And so it just goes down the line of her life from that point on and trying to navigate the world and getting to know these intimate details about her family members by eating their food and things she doesn't really want to know. You know what I mean? She doesn't want to know about the things her mother's dealing with emotionally. And it's big emotions that a 9-year-old can't really comprehend, but she's tasting it in her mother's food, and she's crying while she's eating the cake, and she can't understand, why do I feel this? What's going on? What's wrong with my mother? And how is she hiding these emotions from everyone? And it's just an amazing book. And it goes down the line of discovering all of these secrets of other people in her family who have like powers and who have been hiding them all from each other and sometimes hiding them from themselves. And I love I love this story because it speaks to how mundane and normal a family can be, but also have this extraordinary part of it that you would think would have big impact and change everything. And the whole family is like coming together around it or something, but it just doesn't work that way. And it's just, I have read this book almost every year since I first read it, and I love it. Every time I read it, it's a different story. And
I'm going to read it. And I'm going to tell you, that is so similar to a book that I started writing but never finished.
Really? Write it anyway. Write it anyway. You'll be telling it from a totally different perspective.
It's different. I don't want to talk about it because I'm almost afraid to put the idea out there, but I'm like, you're lying to me. This book exists. I'm sorry. I have to read it, and I'm probably going to write it anyway. I think I'm going to have a number of books to write by the time we get off this call. So I need to get my
I want my superhero book for women in their 40s. I need that. I need to read your story about, tasting emotions in food, whatever it may be. I need those stories from you.
Okay, well, I'll see what I can do. I'll get those to you ASAP. Yes, ma'am. So I will do that. So great. Well, thank you so much. Listen, I feel like we could have talked all day.
Absolutely.
And it's been so good. I'm probably going to have you back. I think I'm just going to have a season like maybe in a year or so where it's just going to be I'm just bringing everybody back because every single person's been on. I'm like, no, I want you back. I want you back.
The repeats.
Yeah, the replay. Let's reload. Let's reload all the guests because I've had some incredible guests that I just want to keep talking to. So I hope that everybody enjoyed the conversation, and I hope that you writers took away, you feel like you understand the editing process a bit more. Remember that editors are human. If I had to give any bit of advice to a writer, it's like, remember, writers are human, editors are humans. We are all human beings, right? That's why you're not going to be able to work with every editor. Every editor's not going to be able to work with you. And as Kathleen said, someone's critique of your work is not a reflection on your writing.
Absolutely. It's not at all.
Not
you can be a great writer and just have written something that wasn't that great,
or you can be a great writer that this person doesn't like. I mean, there are books that I always remember picking up this book that had like on the front, it was like, won all these prizes and whatever. And then reading, I was like, oh no, I left that book on a train in Germany. I was like, oh no, please, I can't. No, I'm reading that.
I have had that experience of thinking, how did you win these awards? It's just like, it's just not for me.
I didn't like it. And that doesn't mean anything about your writing, right? And so as I said, remember, like, and one last thing I want to leave everybody with, any writers who are kind of hesitant about the editing process, something that I always remind myself of is every book I've ever loved has been edited.
That's right. That is absolutely right. Every single one. And you would not believe the painstaking work that went into creating that book. It didn't just fall out of the writer as it was on the page when you read it.
No.
There was a huge process, years long, in getting it to that place.
Yes.
So,
And so
yeah.
be patient with yourself. Remember that, like I always say, you can't write, or you shouldn't, or don't write a book alone. Like, it takes a community, it takes an editor, it takes somebody to lay it out and make it look gorgeous. And, it takes readers and people to, leave reviews, and like the whole community. And so don't even attempt to write that book alone. If you want to partner with an editor, then do that. Just find the right person for you, and go right ahead. And if anybody thinks, I'm writing this boss speculative fiction or whatever they're writing, and I want Kathleen to edit, because remember I told you I don't edit fiction. If you want somebody to edit nonfiction, fine, give me a shout. But I don't edit fiction right now. So if you want that done, you want to get in touch with Kathleen, tell us how the audience can get in touch with you.
Oh, anywhere on the internet under Kathleen_Naytia. That's Kathleen_Naytia. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. I am not on Facebook. If you see me on Facebook, it's a lie. It's not me. I'm also on TikTok. I don't create anything on there, but you can definitely send me a message on there if you want to. Or you can go to my website, KathleenNaytia.com, and just send me a message on there, and we can get together and work on whatever you got going. I would love to work with you. If you're out there and you're listening, I want to work with you. Come on.
Yeah. And same here. If you are writing that nonfiction book and you want a writing coach or an editor, give me a shout. You know where to find me. You found me here, so you definitely know where to find me. But everything is going to be in the show notes. If you're watching us on YouTube, thanks for hanging out in our living room, bedroom, wherever you are. If you're listening to us on the podcast, please, please, please hit subscribe. If you're on YouTube, please, please, please hit subscribe. Share it with a friend. And happy writing, folks. Thanks.
Yes. Bye.
Bye. Thank you for joining us today. You can find out more about our guests in the notes below, and don't forget to hit subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss new episodes when they drop. And if this has inspired you to get your own writing project into the world, click on my website below and learn how you can work with me as a writing coach or an editor. Until next time, I send you big love from a small island.